Adrian, we're here on Wongal country, home to the traditional custodians of the Darug Nation at Ballast Point Park. Adrian McGregor, Principal of McGregor Coxall, and tell me more about your practice.
Well, we are now a global practice and we have three primary disciplines. So we have landscape architecture, environmental services and urbanism. So we've effectively got three disciplines or kind of global teams that work together and we collaborate on all sorts of different projects all around the world.
And how does this project fit into that suite of works that you've been doing for the last 15, 20 odd years?
This was crucial to the practice because it really was an experiment in many ways. So I think we challenged ourselves here as a team to try and deliver an outcome that was, to our kind of objectives, to be exemplary. So we wanted to achieve extremely high levels of sustainability and we wanted to try and see if we could be zero carbon, to see if we could create renewable energy, to create a regenerative ecology. So we really wanted to try and deliver a project that was meaningful and had legacy to the city and to the people of Sydney.
And that's important because of the history of this site. Can you explain that?
Yeah, I mean, many harbourfront sites in Sydney are contested places. So this originally was, of course, incredible Sydney Harbour sandstone landscape, and there was Aboriginal occupation and use of shoreline, and then there was a Menevia villa that was situated on the headland that was there for some time, and it was a wealthy gentleman's villa. And the remains of that can be seen on the site, so we did an archaeological dig to uncover some of that. And then on top of that came the industrial heritage. So we saw Caltex come along, and effectively this site was used for oil storage and also manufacturing of grease and lubricants. So the oil was delivered to the site, it was held here from ship, pumped onto site, and then it was shipped out across the city as lubricants and oils.
Wow.
So incredible industrial heritage, and of course that transformed the site. And the excavations and the cuttings that resulted from those engineered structures have produced this incredible beauty on the site now, which was very important in terms of our interpretation.
And so what did the client's brief look like?
Well, the other interesting thing about the project is that it was contested even in its earliest forms because there actually was a housing development that was proposed for the site, and there were some deals done. So community came together and there was some activism and they prevented the site from being developed for residential use. And as such, it was set aside as parkland. So that community activism was a crucial sort of part of its transformation. And as such, that the client's brief then was to was Sydney Harbour Foreshore Authority, and the brief really was to try and I think not to erase the layers of history, and to deliver a park for as part of Sydney for the local community, and also I think as a destination. So it was a complex project in that community were very, very interested in the project. Our former Prime Minister Paul Keating was also instrumental in overseeing what happened here. So it was contested in many ways, and the outcome I think is really, it's an ecological regeneration, but we've tried not to erase the cultural layers that have kind of added onto the site over its history.
So what are the broad strokes conceptually for the site?
I think the the way that we describe it, so Philip Coxall and myself and our team, when the project was conceived, its name is Ballast Point. So the idea that we had at the time was to say the site had been excavated and the rock material, the ballast, had been put on ships that were coming from Europe, and that ballast was going back. So they would bring goods which were traded here, and then they would return with the ballast from this site. So the site had been continuously cut away and eroded, and the idea of ballast for us was important because we didn't want to then go and excavate or erode another site to bring materials to this one to try and repair it. So one of the overriding principles was to say, what is here and what can we reuse that is going to minimise the impact and footprint on other sites. So try to be as intelligent as we could with the new interventions. So that, I think that was one of the big principles. And then that took us down a train of thought which actually took us into looking at some of the dumps around Sydney. So we went and looked at construction waste, we walked around dumps, and we tried to find material that was discarded that we could use on the project to minimise its footprint again. And so Phil and I spent a lot of time combing through dumps. It was really interesting. But what it led to was the material that you can see on the walls, all the gabion walls.
Yeah.
So that's all recycled construction material. And we found that in Dialer Dump. And then that became a kind of a segue into the exploration of the recycled materials, and that now they're quite a visible part of the outcome. So that was another big kind of a direction that emerged as we worked. Yeah.
Adrian, we're here on the central walkway, and I'd love it if you could take us through this whole structure of the site, please.
Okay, well, the site is, of course, a series of terraces. And so from water level, just above high tide, right down at the bottom, all the way up to street level at the back is an entire headland that has really been sculpted, I guess, in a primary sense. So the idea is that there are a series of eroded platforms that all contain different kinds of program and orientate themselves differently across the harbour to capture views and allow navigation. So actually working out how to traverse the top of the site to the bottom was a really tricky thing, because we had to work out how to incorporate level changes and how to engage with the site itself. So when the sandstone was cut for the engineering purposes, it left a series of benches. And then of course the site was contaminated as well. So it was covered by hydrocarbons, soils that were soaked in hydrocarbons. So the remediation program was to remove all of that material and effectively go back to bare rock. So the sandstone, the Sydney sandstone that underlies the site is the kind of medium that we had to build from. So the levels had to engage with all of those cut surfaces. And it was very tricky to set up a series of discoveries or journeys, a journey around the site that allowed multiple discoveries, I guess. And some of that is through stairs and kind of suspended walkways. So there are steel structures that engage with sandstone, and there are numerous travel paths around the site that try to take advantage of that. And then spatially, of course, the native vegetation, which is all collected from native seed. So it's all genetically true to the site. So we're starting to see the regeneration of a genetic stock of native plant material that is place relevant. So it's kind of exciting to see it, change and become a headland forest again.
Yeah, and is that planting been successful, noting that it was a contaminated site?
I think on the whole it's been successful, but there have been some areas that have very shallow soils and I think some of the vegetation has struggled a little bit. But over time, the species that occupy, it takes on ecology. Starts to kind of self-perpetuate, I guess.
Yeah.
And there's a succession. So from the original planting to birds carrying in seed, and it's starting to take on its own ecological life. You're starting to see it, become something different.
And particularly the canopy trees really reinforce the edges, and also some of the circular forms on the lower level, grass level as well. Was that strategically planned in that way?
It was. So the types of vegetation are matched to soils and water. So what you'll see in the circles at the bottom of the site is we retain some of the original engineered drainage structures on the site. So we're able to intercept some of the pipe and pit network and then plug in our new infrastructure into that. So it's a hybrid of original engineered structure with new intervention. And the water is diverted around those rings, which then gave us the ability to grow some of the tea trees and the melaleucas that enjoy that, that sort of profile.
Yeah.
Plus, in terms of water-sensitive urban design, it's doing work in terms of cleaning water. Any residual material that's in the soil is filtered out through that system.
Now I want to talk about poetry, because we stood earlier up inside that tank 1 with the wonderful poem encasing us, and as I walk through the site I kind of see these moments where there's poetry or writing and interpretation throughout the site. How did you consider that as a design driver?
There's a series of cultural interpretations that were kind of woven in. So the stories of the site obviously are very important. Les Murray's poem is beautiful as a piece that was commissioned actually for that structure. So it's quite wonderful as a standalone story and very evocative. It asks more questions than kind of it answers, I guess. And then the interpretive signage, so the Menevia structure over there, there's some written word around the heritage of that. And there's a small museum that we built with artefacts that were excavated, and they were contained on site. Unfortunately, over time there's been some vandalism, and I think they've removed the artefacts now. So it's difficult to keep some of those things safe, I think. But it's interesting when you walk around the site and you catch stories from especially locals who are telling the story of the park to visitors. So it's fascinating to hear their interpretation of the stories of the site as they explain it. Sometimes you can walk behind people and you can kind of listen in a little bit and eavesdrop. It's really beautiful how community owns this site now. And there are some little locks that you'll see that have been tagged into cages, and they're all inscribed. So that's written word as well. They're kind of little love stories, and so the community, the previous stories, and then the new overlays of stories that sit over the top are really kind of interesting, I think, and add to the kind of discovery of the project and its magic, I guess, really. Yeah.
Adrian, you've spoken a little bit about sustainability as we've walked through the site, but I was just wondering if we could recap that here in terms of how this site has chosen to be sustainable and resilient as it goes forward as well.
Well, that's a great question, because here we are standing on Sydney Harbour looking at smoke haze drifting across from fires. New South Wales is alight. We're in a climate emergency. So, the sustainability measures on this site were, even back in 2006 when we designed the project, were very much about trying to foreground best practice in sustainability to minimise carbon footprint. And importantly, at the top of the site, on tank 101, which is the largest oil storage tank, the idea there was to add in the wind turbines connected to battery And that was to signal at the high point of the site on the largest tank the transition from fossil fuels into renewable energy. So that was not only a kind of an actual renewable energy infrastructure, it was also a symbol about how we as people and our cities need to actually change. And the pace of that change now needs to be more rapid than we ever dreamed that I think it would need to be. So importantly, sites like this signal to city residents and visitors that the ecology of our headlands and our harbour landscape are really crucial. So the sustainability measures ran from renewable energy into water sensitive urban design, into materials, recycled materials, the collection of native seed on the site for the propagation of plant material. So the other thing that we did when we finished the project, or as we were moving through it, we tried to track the metrics of all the major components of the project, and then we quantified them. So we wanted to see if we could measure the result against the sort of business as usual approach. And we learned a lot from doing that. So and as you go through the course of the project and things change, it's great to have targets. You can then say, how are we tracking to what our ambitions and goals and aspirations. So I think overall we tested a lot of ideas here that have then found their way into some of our other projects. And of course now I think we're starting to see the world, as it's embracing data, starting to track metrics in cities in a much more powerful way. And I think for landscape architecture it's really crucial because we need to be able to describe what we do in an evidence-based way. So we've got to be able to demonstrate to our political leaders, to our citizens, and even amongst ourselves, the quantifiable benefits of what we achieve. And that's a discourse and a shift in the language of landscape architecture, how we talk and how we describe our work. So that is all, I think, making the sustainability outcomes, environmental outcomes, more powerful and more able to be digested by those that maybe don't understand ecologies and don't understand science.
So important, just that community literacy around all these issues and the way that landscape architects can be advocates for communicating the climate change literacy. Before I finish up with you today, I wanted to just talk about the site in its section, both its longitudinal section down the terraces and cross section, and hoping that you can describe that for us.
Well, the headland itself is part of 3 headlands. And it was actually Paul Keating, the former Prime Minister, and the Barangaroo headland, which completed that tripartite 3 headland model. So, and the idea was that these 3 headlands so it's Ballast Point, Barangaroo, and Balls Head, are the kind of gateway into the inner harbour. So it signals the landscape transition from outer harbour to inner harbour. So in a cross-sectional sense, as you say, in the 2 sections, they're really through the headland itself, and it has a steeper face on this side, which you can see behind the stair, and you can see the old bund wall, which is part of that section. So it's a very engineered face on this side, and that's because the wharf occupied these old concrete slabs, and that was sort of working wharf. So the bund wall behind us, that big concrete structure, that was there and actually ran all the way around the site, and it was there to protect the harbour from an oil spill. So if one of these tanks, for whatever reason, there was an accident and they started to leak out oil, then that bund wall was there to hold it back from spilling out into the harbour. So it's a huge wall, enormous, and you can see behind it as we were on site, and Phil was out here doing a lot of the site work, and we cut through that wall, but we weren't sure what was behind it. So when the contractors saw cut through the bund, we uncovered what was sitting behind, which is incredible kind of steel reinforcing rods, and our structural engineers said, look, yeah, we can actually leave all of this and build our new wall behind. So it was a bit exploratory. So the stair was conceived in a bit of an unknown territory. So what we found when we did that excavation and demolition was pretty amazing. So I think the other important lesson there is that when Phil was on site and we were dealing with drawing in the office, 3D modelling in the office, bringing it to the site, and then trying to match up, then doing new survey. It was a constant iteration between measuring the site and then modelling the work and then coming to site and fitting that together. So that was very iterative, and it went right through the site, and it shows how crucial it is for landscape architects to actually be part of the site process, working with the contractor in a collaborative way to get a great result. So the sections that you see that result from that process are where we could intervene with some of these stairs and projections, and then linking to existing infrastructure or excavated site material. It's just sandstone platform. So in one sense you'll get the very cliff-like section, and then as you point at the harbour bridge you'll get a much more benched profile that runs back up the headland. So they are two quite distinctive typologies, as you point out. Yeah.
Well, it's a beautiful project. Thank you so much for sharing your wisdom and a bit more insight for our students here at Ballast Point Park.
Thanks very much.